2024, South Africa reclaimed the Rugby Championship in a historic Freedom Cup. Northampton Saints took just their second Premiership title. Georgia won Rugby Europe again, and Antoine Dupont did this. But in amongst Antoine's gold medals and Olympic level side quests, this was a year in which some rugby was, believe it or not, played by some people. And in order to celebrate the best of that rugby, it is time for this, the Squidge Rugby Team of the Year 2024. But before we get into 2024's finest pack of forwards, it's time for the guy who picks the team and tells them roughly what they should be doing when they get onto the grass. It's 2024's Coach of the Year, an award I'm assured people are always totally normal about. However, this year there can only be one winner. The Springboks have dominated men's Test rugby this year, and whilst Rassie Erasmus deserves enormous credit, if we stick to the true mantra on which this team is selected, the coach who defined and shaped rugby over 2024 was not Rassie, but instead Tony Brown. A shock inclusion in their coaching panel at the end of last year, the former Japan attack guru has revolutionised the Springboks. The traditional strengths remain, but Brown has taken them to a brand new level by adding the world's most innovative, exciting attack onto the world's biggest boys. From tiny trick plays to entire new structures, this has got new dimensions out of players like Peter Steptoe, Sia Khaleesi and Cheslin Colby, all already exceptional, yet playing some career best rugby with the ball in hand this year, taking a side who just won a World Cup up gears thanks to his innovations, ideas and radical new approaches to Springbok rugby. And it's that new approach that's made him the pretty nailed on inclusion as the Squidge Rugby Coach of the Year 2024. And so with that, it's time to dive into the front end of the team. The first guys on the team sheet, the middle or the end, depends how you lay out the team sheet. The big boys, the power lads, the piano shifters, large ones, the giant girls, the pack, the forwards. Last year, the Springbok commanded the pack with 3 of the 8 positions. Etzebeth and Khaleesi both making the team for the 3rd year in a row. But before we find out if they can make it 4 in a row, it's time to start right up front for the other Bok incumbent. It's the best loose head of 2024. Is there a man more universally adored in all of rugby than Ox Unshay? With his fun little catchphrase, his bullocking style of play, endearing love of cake, and all-round adorable energy, the only people who don't love Ox are those 10 seconds away from packing down against him in a scrum. This year, Unshay became one of the very few players to graduate from Bomb Squad University, nailing down a place as a guaranteed starter for the Springboks in one of the most difficult positions to become a fixture on a team sheet worldwide in any Test nation, the front row for South Africa. Ox Unshay was always a great dynamic carrier, but his hands have come on even further over the last year, and his scrummaging has gone from strength to strength, becoming possibly the most dominant, the most feared loosehead in the entire game. For all his adorable, lovely nature, he's now a guy everyone across road rugby is terrified of, smashing the shit out of anyone who stands his way, and no doubt gobbling down the remains afterwards. Ox Unshay is comfortably the best loosehead in the world, and better than that. 2024 just somehow felt like his year. His performances in the World Cup, mostly off the bench, put him into the spotlight, but rugby's number one, the Springboks fondant fancy fiend, ate it up. Salads don't win scrums, but in 2024, Oxers seem to win whatever they like. Hooker might just have been this year's tightest call. Ireland's Dan Sheehan looked to have it sewn up after an exceptional first half of the year, scoring seemingly infinite tries over Ireland's Six Nations campaign and Leinster's European form. Then an ACL injury, so a miss half the year's rugby. As ever, Springbok duo Bongi Mbambi and Malcolm Marx were exceptional, possibly the next best pair, but they share the shirt, taking points off each other repeatedly. England skipper Jamie George has been brilliant and led the team incredibly well, just the most consistent classic hooker imaginable, whilst his female counterpart Lark Atkin-Davis has been an utter try machine. Black Fern Georgia Ponsonby almost propelled herself into the shirt as well with some sublime form, but ultimately, sublime wasn't enough. We were looking for boom. Pito Malvaka is a stick of dynamite chucked into Test rugby. There's a pretty good argument he's the best carrier in the world at the minute. Blessed with an enormous, robust frame, and yet his finest attribute is the way that he throws it around like a bowling ball, slinging himself into contact, bouncing people off like crazy. He's pretty much unstoppable once he gets going, and it takes almost nothing to get him going. His weird yet enormous shape making him so difficult to wrap up and even harder to stop dead once he heads at you with even a step's worth of momentum. and yet that is so far from all of his game. Malvaka regularly makes 15 plus tackles a match from the hooker position, something virtually unheard of in modern rugby. He wins turnovers like nobody's business. His line-out darts are flawless, excellent, and boy, oh boy, can he scrum. A huge part of France's incredibly physical year up front. And then we have what he's done over this last year for Toulouse. He finished 23-24 on 10 tries, including scores in the top 14 final, Champions Cup semi, and round of 16. And 3 starts into the new season, he already has 3 tries in the bag, 1 in successive games, just highlighting the consistency with which he brings the boomfar. Pito Malvaka is an utter force of nature, and despite stiff competition, he's had a year that makes him very hard to deny. All the way back in March, England's Maud Muir said she felt she was nowhere near reaching her potential. I think, now in December, she may have to reassess that. Muir has long since been a bit of a freak of nature, almost superhumanly strong, with a surprising turn of pace and more energy than Solar Power Rabbit in the Swedish summer. Muir has been channeling that energy, a bit like Unshay, into being women's rugby's finest impact sub for some years now. 20 of her first 25 caps coming off the bench. In 2024, however, with regular starter Sarah Byrne injured, Muir was given her chance, and wow did she take it. The England scrum has been basically entirely dominant all year, chewing up and spitting out even props considered elsewhere to be world class, all at Muir's hands. Her dominance at set piece underscored both an unbeaten year for the Red Roses and another league title for Gloucester Hartpury, where her dominant performance in the semi-final included a try before ultimately changing the final. With Bristol 10 ahead at half-time, her work at the scrum turned the game entirely, putting Gloucester in the driver's seat, scoring 29 points in a huge second half effort, inspired by Muir's magnificence. This all plays alongside her typically excellent work for the ball in hand. A brilliant carrier, scoring 3 tries for England and 5 for Gloucester, huge numbers for a tight head, her power and guile all evident in all aspects of the play. Most notably, this critical second half score to beat Canada in a tight WXV-1 finale. Maud Muir may have said she didn't feel she was anywhere near her potential at the start of the year, but by the end of it, well, if she isn't there now, we'd all just better look out. Some world-class players have quite obviously incredibly high ceilings, but others seem instead to live in open-air houses, their limits seemingly only held by their own work rate and imagination. I don't know how Tyke Byrne is still getting better. We're now into the 10th year of his career, and ever since first blowing minds at the Scarlets, he's seemingly improved every single season, and despite how outstanding he's now been for so many years, 2024 might have been perhaps the best form of his career. A sentence you could probably say every year of his career. Byrne's Six Nations was kinda staggering, somehow covering every single blade of grass, running the competition's best line-out, scoring 2 fantastic tries, and in this score out in Paris, a particular highlight to put Ireland into a commanding lead in one of the performances of the entire year, highlighting his all-round game. The angles of running he adds to his equally competent tight stuff is so impressive, and on return to Munster he excelled again, the key player and frequent man of the match in their march towards finishing top of the URC before being named club captain in September. And since then, his form has continued to just climb beyond any of the rooftops. Moved into the back row for the autumn, he was brilliant once again, either side of pulling Munster through a tumultuous season with more brilliant performances. Tyke Byrne is quite simply one of the best rugby players on the planet, and even at age 33, I'd back him to be even better than he is right now this time next year. Well, add another one to the column. At this point, it's getting slightly hard to find new ways to describe him, as for the 4th successive year, the 5th time in 7 teams of the year, the Eben Etzebeth Award for Best Eben Etzebeth goes to Eben Etzebeth. Eben Etzebeth this year became the most capped Springbok of all time, overtaking the great Victor Matfield, and with it, he might just have overtaken him in another sense. There's a growing argument that Eben Etzebeth is the best forward to ever play the game, one I don't think has been talked about enough. It's going pretty hard to argue he wouldn't be in at least the 23 for an all-time team, most likely in the starting 15. He's well known and endlessly regarded for his aggression, his physicality, his brutality, his drive, the enforcer qualities captured by Bakkies Botha so well, but Etzebeth's Steph's point of difference is how he combines those with the wile and skill and line-out nous of Matfield. His hands are superb, his turn of pace underrated, and his reading of the game elite, both for bullying purposes, such as the day he gave poor Jack Van Poorfleet an afternoon that will last a lifetime every single time he shuts his eyes, and for less evil purposes, such as this brilliant support line against Wales. He gives the pass early instead of doing too much himself, and then fights to stay alive in support, eventually running in the try himself. Ibn Etzebeth might be the perfect second row. He might be the perfect Springbok. He might be the perfect rugby player. And for the 5th time in a row, he takes his annual slot in the Squidge Rugby Team of the Year. We'll see you all again next year when I try and find more ways to describe this terrifying beanpole once again, as he continues to nail in his all-time status. I can't imagine how hard it must be to coach Pieter-Steph du Toit at this stage. Having transcended from decent international second row to one of the great Springbok flankers of all time around 5 years ago, I don't know if du Toit has put in one bad performance or taken a single step backwards in that half-decade since. Last year, his turn in the World Cup final was one for the history books, and every minute of every match since, he's been at that standard. Something you'd have thought impossible. This year has been peak du Toit, which is to say any du Toit. The guy playing his typical tireless brand of sweating on anything that moves before promptly removing its ribs. And yet, in amongst all of the violence and mad tackles and brilliant work rate, this year, new Springbok attack coach Tony Brown's influence has seen du Toit freed and allowed to be a whole new, more dynamic player. Where before Razzie used his work rate in tight spaces, Brown's influence has seen him deployed for his other freakish strengths. Whenever discussing PSDT's performances at the end of the year before, it's always been about his defence and sheer effort levels, but in 2024, it became so much more about what he does with the ball in palm. Frequently deployed in the wide channels, we've seen du Toit absolutely fly down wings, galloping like a giraffe on the run from the cops, stolen goods in one hand, ready to be popped over the top into a getaway car. That metaphor got slightly away from me, but it just gives me something in common with the poor wingers ending up against PSDT this entire year, as he's sometimes plonked on those wings. His offloading, passing and running game, all now as exceptional as his typically tireless defence, and now being used properly, brilliantly, and often brutally by the box. This has been verging on a brand new peak for one of rugby's most consistent performers, and you just can't see him slowing down anytime soon. Pieter-Steph du Toit has become a guy you don't coach, but just deploy. There's probably no way you can humanly make him better or pump him up more, so you just put him in the arena and let him do what he does best. Be one of the greats. I don't think it would be unfair at all if, at the start of the year, you didn't know the name Ifa Wafer. With just 2 caps to a name going into 2024, both off the bench, over 500 days apart, and at only 20 years of age, when Wafer was named to start Ireland's opening game against France this year, most saw it as a nod to the future for a team that had been struggling. Blood, a promising youngster, in a game where Ireland were destined to get smashed. Instead, Ireland stood up, giving a pretty excellent performance, but none louder than the outstanding young flanker in the 7 shirt. Wafer scoring a try, excelling around the park, and making the reaction to her being named against Italy a week later rather different. She was one very much for the present. Ifa Wafer was, for me, behind only Kildun as the player of the Women's Six Nations, and indeed the player of the year on the women's side of the game. I can scarcely remember a more complete player coming along so fully formed from the jump. Her carrying is ferocious, unstoppable, her nose for the try line top tier, and her defence just exceptional. Not only is her work rate huge, she's a menace at the breakdown and always in the right place at the right time on both sides of the ball. She finished the Six Nations with the most line breaks of any forward and of any non-English player. She was joint second with the also outstanding, also unbelievable, could have also easily slotted into this team Alex Callender, the only player ahead of her for turnovers, who was also one of only 3 players to hit more rucks over the entire tournament than her. Every part of her game, she was in the top of the stats. She was the only forward in the top 10 for metres gained, right up there for carries, an absolute statistical monster, a player who excelled in every area, and then, when called back into the shirt 4 months later, proved it wasn't a blip or just a brief burst of form, or even that she was just a stats nerd's dream. Wafer was the undeniable player of the match in maybe Test Rugby's biggest upset of the year. Ireland women went into 2024 favourite for the wooden spoon in the Six Nations and a spot in WXV 3, playing the likes of Hong Kong and Madagascar. Instead, they wound up third in the Six Nations, best of the rest, and dumped into WXV 1, where Wafer's 2 tries and player of the match performance inspired Ireland to a win over the Black Ferns. An utterly astonishing result. The equivalent for men's fans watching of, I don't know, Japan beating the Springboks. Most might have gone into 2024 unsure who Aoife Wafer was, but I can guarantee with another Six Nations and a World Cup now on the horizon, not many will be scratching their heads when they hear her name much longer. It feels weird to say that someone as well-rounded, acclaimed and accomplished now as Caelan Doris can be underrated, and yet it just might be true. Doris was on the brink of this team last year, the season where he truly hit world-class status, and since he hasn't looked back, getting only better over 2024. Ireland, on all-round aggregate, have probably been the second best men's team in the world over 2024, and Doris, for me, has been comfortably their best player. Yes, he's a big lad, but the most outstanding thing about Caelan Doris is that watching him, you almost don't notice his size. Doris's game is all about the small touches. He plays like a coach's dream, as though he's executing every tiny detail they've discussed throughout the week on their PowerPoints and coaching sessions flawlessly. His decision-making around contact is particularly brilliant, both with and without the ball. His choice of what rucks to enter and which to leave, how to advance them, how to clear out on his own ball, who to hit, the identification of threats is amongst the best out there. His carrying is excellent, but alongside Gregory Aldrit, he's one of the best in the world at presenting the ball afterwards. So good at guaranteeing the scrum half has clean ball to play off the next phase. His knack, however, for slowing down oppositions doing the same with just a slight shove or a nudge is uncanny, incredible. His work on the kick chase, underrated, and it all adds up into this kind of dream package. Doris is either the smartest or the most coachable forward in world rugby. A guy who adds up so many 1% until they become a whole. He was the star of Ireland's Six Nations victory, the best player in green almost every single game, before putting in, for me, the best performance by a human in the Champions Cup final. Just excellent as he took an all-timer to lose team to extra time. And over the summer, he was once again probably Ireland's brightest light as they tied the Test series in South Africa, leaving the year now as the Emerald Isles captain and star player. He might not be a player who pumps people up and gets them excited, but Caelan Doris is a near flawless rugby player, and after losing his spot at the 11th hour last year to Sia Khaleesi, he's finally now a part of our team of the year. Honourable mentions speed round. Let's do this as quickly as possible because there's so many players that deserve mentions. Dan Sheehan would have been there and had that shirt if not for injury loss. Julie Montoya almost took it afterwards, and there's so many great hookers to mention. I'm just going to run through them now. Bongi Mbanambi, Jamie George, Log Atkin Davis, Dewi Lake, Georgia Ponsby, Neve Jones, Lana Skeldon, Malcolm Marks, Cody Taylor, Julian Montoya. No, I've mentioned him. Augustine Creevy maybe deserves a cheeky mention, as does Johnny Matthews, Vano Kokadze for Georgia, Canada's Andrew Quattran, and retiring Poland captain Gregor Buczek, who went out on the absolute top of his game this year. Elsewhere in the front are so many South Africans in particular to mention: Frans Malherbe, Thomas Dutoy, Wilco Lowe, Vincent Cox, and the vastly underrated Gerald Steenkamp, alongside the entire women's unit of Gwala, Charlie, and Latsha, deserve mentions for a year of truly bringing the boom this year. As for non-South African front rowers, of which I'm sure there's at least like 4. Hannah Botterman would have been a worthy inclusion, and Tyra Lomax likely starts for an all-male team. Last year's incumbent Eve Kopani was great again, as was her teammate Brady O'Gorman. Linda Dujang, Sylvia Tarani, and Christine Belisle were brilliant. Hope Rogers might just be the best player the US have ever produced and showed it once again. Andrew Porter, excellent as ever. Tomasi Williams had a great breakthrough year, and then mentions for Thomas Gaggio, Angus Bell, Aroni Maui, and Ben Talmafina. All great every year, but particularly good this year. And final mention, however, for the props anyway, has to go to Italy's Mirko Spagnolo, a guy who seems to just defy logic and pull impossible feats on a weekly basis. This guy is ridiculous, and I love him. Ireland's Joe McCarthy and Japan's Warner Dearns were very close in the lock stakes, with Arhis Nyman and Franco Mostert just as good as ever, just as close as ever. Scott Barrett had a great year, but All Black teammates Tupou Vai, who's quite the world class and we don't talk about it enough, and Patrick Tuipulotu, maybe the best impact sub-lock in the world alongside Snyman, also deserve nods. Manuel Ndeka, Theo McFarland, Gabriel Gabriel Oliveira and Adam Beard all deserve mentions for the smaller nations, whilst Wallaby pair Jeremy Williams and particularly Nick Frost had huge years. Ollie Chesham and George Martin, both great for England, but Mario Toje was probably almost 50-50 with Byrne for that second slot after a year of imperial shithousing. Franco Molina had a great breakthrough year for Argentina, whilst Rosie Galligan, Maya Roos, Sam Monaghan, Letitia Royer and Tyson Beckerboom were all phenomenal. Meanwhile, right, let's do back rowers. There's so many back rowers to talk about and so little time. We've got all the time in the world. Ardy Survey is enough. He just could have gotten in the team. Like, he would have got in, no one would have blinked. Same with Rob Valentini, who was phenomenal, and last year's incumbent, Sia Khaleesi. Aaron Wainwright was the only Welshman in proper contention for this, though Jack Morgan remained one of the best players in the world when he's fit and on form. And there was a Welsh woman very close in Alex Callender, who likely would have partnered Aoife Wafer in an all-female team, probably joined there by Red Rose Alex Matthews. Though there's so many contenders. Sadia Kabea as ever, Ashley Masters of Australia, Erin King had a great breakthrough year, Rachel Malcolm played some of her best rugby, Evie Gallagher too alongside her, Sophie de Goody spent half the year injured but easily could have slid into this team again for what she did in the first half. Aseza Hele is a standing item at this point, but she's so good, as is Pablo Matera, again could have been an easy inclusion in the team, and a bunch of tier 2 players deserve mentions as well. Friend of the channel Raimundo Martinez was possibly, arguably, I would say Chile's best player over 2024. He was fantastic. Spain captain Mario Pichardi was instrumental in their superb year, particularly that first half. Becca Gugadze, great as always. Nicolas Martash kept up his form from last year's World Cup. Romania's Alexandra Mitu had a hugely explosive year, as did the USA's Corey Daniel, who I think is a real player to watch over the coming years. Alexander Roma and Francois Cross were both tireless for France. Josh van der Fleer everywhere for Ireland. Sam Underhill, great as always. Fraser McWright is a bundle of bullshit in every facet of the game, whilst Japan's Michael Leach and Kazuki Himeno remained talismanic. Ben Earl was probably the best back row in this year's Men's Six Nations and looked nailed on at one stage, but the loudest honourable mentions have to go to a full back row's worth of guys sitting just outside the spotlight. Argentina's Joaquin Oviedo has been floating around pro rugby for about 4 years now, but this was a massive coming of age year for him. The guy has become one of the outright best ball carriers in the game and amongst the hardest workers out there, something he shares with the breakthrough player of the year, unarguably Wallace Satiti. It took him a couple of caps to get up to speed, but the moment he did, it felt like the All Blacks suddenly had a second surveyor on the pitch. His impact at every aspect of the game, enormous, and his performance at Twickenham, one for the ages. Could have so easily gone in the team, but I want to finish on maybe the hardest worker of the year, maybe the most deserving, the definition of the honourable mention. Canada captain Lucas Rumble. A guy trapped in a horrendous situation, a team pretty much without hope. Rumble gave them an example to follow. Their overperformance against Scotland and win against Romania this year almost solely down to Rumble's impacts both sides of the ball, as was every match they played. Basically everything Canada did positively all year was him, a guy who gives everything and never seems to slow down. Every minute of every game, start to end, both sides of the ball. If this is a list of folk who deserve to be celebrated, rugby has few characters more worthy of applause at the minute than Lucas Rumble. Thank you for watching that. I hope you enjoyed it. That is the end of Team of the Year for another year, split into just 2 parts. If you haven't seen the one on the backs already, please go and look at the one on the backs that went up a couple of days ago now. There's going to be plenty more coming before the start of Six Nations. We're going to do previews of all Six Nations on the second channel, more Squidge Rugby, with more things coming alongside on the main channel, previewing that, looking at some other things. There's a couple of interesting rugby stories we want to try and cover, while we've got a bit of a chance. So there'll be loads of stuff coming over the next short period of time. And in the meantime, we'll see you soon for more of what I believe they call in the industry, and this is a little known fact, I believe they call it rugby. I still call it Antoine Ball.